Right, everybody, I'm going to remain in this seat because I think if I turn my back on this thing, it's liable to do anything. So hopefully you can all hear me. I'm going to do the introductions tonight because we've quite a few people watching and on Zoom, and I know Brendan wanted to be here, but he has been laid low. So it's a great pleasure to welcome. I don't know, Ciaran, this is the first time you've been here. After the fog of the last 2 or 3 years, we can't remember who's been anywhere. So I'm delighted to introduce Ciaran Reilly here tonight, Dr. Ciaran Reilly, to talk on famine remittances in Ulster and the story of Abraham Bell. I've a wee bit of background on Ciaran, Maynooth University, I'm correct. And Ciaran has made a great study of the famine as a subject for research and on the Irish country aesthetic, the various estates that have evolved in Ireland over particularly the last two or three centuries or whatever as well. So as no doubt you will see it during the course of Ciaran's talk, there's a great link between those because obviously many of those estates had a massive influence on how affairs played out in the Irish famine, 1847 and such like. So I'm not going to blether any longer. I'm just going to sit here and quake beside this Zoom and hope that it holds together. And I'll hand the headset over. What I would say just before hand it over to Ciaran is we were recording this. So what do you call it? I will be uploading a video complete with Ciaran's audio in the next few days or so. So if anybody loses the connection or anything, just bear with me if somebody else has landed in. You should be able to catch up on the video on our website at a later date. Okay, so I'll hand over to Ciaran now. All right.
Okay, yeah. Hopefully that'll sit properly. Okay, good evening, everyone. And to all on Zoom as well, a good evening. Thank you, Jonathan, for welcoming me here tonight, and indeed to Brendan Holland for the invitation to speak here this evening. And I wish Brendan all the best. I know he's laid low at the moment. What I want to talk to you tonight about is famine remittances in Ulster and the story of Abraham Bell. As Jonathan mentioned, much of my research centres on the Great Irish Famine, and in particular, I've made studies of places like Strokestown in County Roscommon, my own native County Offaly, and more recently of the Drone Coot Hill area in County Cavan. So I specialise in the Great Irish Famine. I know there has been some work done here recently on the topic of the famine. Patricia Bogue's excellent book on Dungannon and the wider area during the famine being one, and also the recent work by the Dunamore Historical Society on the Dungannon Workhouse website, which I was involved with. So I thought it might be suitable tonight to bring the story on a little bit further and move away from the famine as such as it happened on the ground, but talk about famine remittances, which played a major part in the famine story. And I chose Abraham Bell then because he was born in County Armagh, not far from here, near Lurgan, and he's central to what happens in this story. So I hope it'll be of relevance to you and that you will enjoy it. So I have a slide to begin with there. Just two quotes if you want to knock it on. Not to worry, that's perfect. So the first quote is taken from the Morning Chronicle in April 1846, and it says, "Hundreds, to my knowledge, have sent home 30% of their earnings in this colony. The numerous letters it has been my painful lot to read within the last 3 months tell a fearful tale of the sufferings of the people at home, parents struggling with want and children inmates of the poorhouse." The second from Bell's Life in Sydney and Sporting Review in September of the same year. "No Irishman would, while he had money, allow his friends around him to starve. One fact was worth 1,000 arguments. The poor emigrant girls who had come to this colony within the last 2 years had sent more than £2,000 to their relatives, and he was sure that 3,000 would be sent this way, which was much better than laying it out in the milliners' shops." For the million or so emigrants who left Ireland during the hungry 1840s and immediately afterward, the memory of their home place was never far from their thoughts. In particular, famine emigrants were anxious that parents and family members would be free from the continued threat of hunger and eviction. When enough money had been saved, they remitted money to family and friends for the purchase of a ticket so that they too could undertake the emigrant voyage. Indeed, in 1851, during the course of a debate in the House of Commons, Lord John Russell, then British Prime Minister, claimed that more than 1.5 million had been sent to Ireland in emigrant remittance since the famine had commenced 6 years previously. While Russell may have greatly underestimated the actual amount, during the course of the next 3 decades, remittances from emigrants continued to stream into Ireland. As David Fitzpatrick has argued, over £34 million was remitted to the United Kingdom between 1848 and 1887, most of which went to Ireland. This money, as it trickled into every town and village in Ireland, provided a means of survival for many and helped fund emigration for thousands of others. Indeed, a survey of Irish newspapers from the late 1840s and early 1850 confirms this, with almost daily reports of people emigrating once they had received remittance money. While a majority of remittances funded individual or family voyages, in certain parishes there was evidence of collective appeals to send remittances so as to induce neighbours and friends to leave. This was particularly true of areas which were devastated by eviction and clearance. Communal remittances by emigrants were often seen as the safest method of transferring money. In April 1847, for example, a man called P. O'Reilly, an emigrant in New York, sent remittances for the relief of the poor of Cootehill in County Cavan. Writing to the Anglo-Celt newspaper, O'Reilly remarked that most of the money had been gathered amongst Cootehill emigrants in New York, and that, quote, "I have the pleasure to forward the enclosed order for £11, the amount of a subscription entered into by the people of Cootehill and its immediate vicinity, resident in New York and Brooklyn, for the relief of their old neighbours in this season of distress. The sum is small, but they are few of us that have not paid to the several collections made here for the most distressed districts of Ireland. I feel doubly proud since we commenced this little collection, for nothing could exceed the gladness with which everyone subscribed." For most Irish famine emigrants, remittances were said to be, quote, "remembrances of love and duty, which made many an aged mother or father's heart to sing with joy." On the receipt of this so-called American money, of course, remittances came from across the globe and not just the United States, but generally speaking, they were often referred to as the American money. The talk tonight examines the significance of these remittances to Ireland during the famine years, taking the business of Abraham Bell, a shipping merchant, as a case study. The talk will provide an insight into the world of the famine emigrant, allowing us a greater understanding of the whole process of emigration from start to finish. In the 1860s, in his history of the Irish in America, John Francis Maguire, pictured on screen, made particular mention of the importance of remittances, which famine immigrants had sent over the ensuing 2 decades. Interestingly, Maguire also provided some insight into the character of Irish immigrants, remarking that in smaller cities and towns, the remittances were far greater than the bigger cities, owing to the fact that there was less vices or distractions for immigrants to squander their money. Remittances were crucial in promoting chain migration, and there quickly grew a dependence on the receipt of American money. According to the Nina Guardian in Tipperary, every village had 4 to 5 orders a week coming from America, thereby facilitating the emigration of others. Indeed, such was the scale of these remittances that many villages were soon emptied of its people. In Lusma, in County Offaly, for example, it was claimed that there was not a man in the parish who was not in receipt of money from America. Such was the frequency with which remittances were sent to would-be emigrants that even Charles Brian-Coney's coaches, pictured here, were said to have been overburdened bringing people to the docks. On one day in March 1853, for example, over 150 people were brought from the town of Clonmel to the port of Waterford for emigration. Likewise, in Killashandra, County Cavan, it was claimed that 7 coaches instead of 1 passed through the town on a daily basis, conveying emigrants to the boat. The social background of the emigrants mattered little, and even the poorest were able to send some amount of remittance within a few months of their arrival in America, Australia, Canada, or elsewhere. And some were substantial amounts. In 1852, a man in County Armagh was reported to have been sent £92 by his daughter in Australia. And remember, £3 would get you to Canada or America, so £92 was a hefty sum to be sent. Similarly, on a single day in January 1853, £300 was received at Newmarket on Fergus Post Office in County Clare. On the same day at Limerick Post Office, 70 registered money letters were received from Melbourne, Australia, ranging from £50 to £500. As one contemporary quipped, quote, "From the great amount that is coming, one would be led to believe that there is a spirit of rivalry in the remittances." Given the vast sums which were arriving, some commentators ventured to suggest which port had brought the largest remittances. These remembrances to family and friends were also followed by money sent to priests and bishops, as masses were offered for loved ones who had already succumbed to the ravages of famine. Indeed, priests were often a favoured method of many for sending remittances, as they were deemed to be trustworthy, or more trustworthy than the post offices. In 1853, for example, Mary Connors of Kenmare, County Kerry, sent her remittances to the parish priest, Father O'Sullivan, while at Maynooth in County Kildare, the bursar of the college, the Reverend Thomas Farley, was a regular recipient of remittances on behalf of parishioners. The receipt of money was often the first correspondence with which the emigrant had after their departure, bringing to an end a period of anxiety for the family. It seems that they waited until there was some money to send until they actually wrote a letter. Indeed, given the frequency of newspaper reports outlining the loss of emigrant ships, such fears were well founded. In the case of the money, £2.08 remitted to Honora Brosnan in Scartaglen, County Kerry in August 1852, for example, there were continued worries about family members who had not been heard of since they arrived in New York. The flow of remittance money to Ireland generally increased towards the end of the summer months, as many were reluctant to leave before their farming duties had been completed, and so money was held back until the end of the summer. With the harvest gathered, the rush for America and other venues once more ensued. By 1853, such was the exodus of labourers from the West, it was reported that with the impending harvest, season labour was scarce in County Galway in particular. Even those employed in relief schemes were anxious to leave, those it seemed who had a steady income. In November 1851, it was reported that out of 200 men engaged in drainage works at Ballinasloe, County Galway, 50 were preparing to emigrate to America after receiving money. The situation was similar elsewhere, and every man who could collect £3 was said to be rushing away from the neighbourhood. Understandably, remittances were not looked on favourably by some, particularly where many of the skilled population were leaving. Servants were also among those who undertook to emigrate, safe in the knowledge that there would be plentiful work in America for them. In April 1853, 35 servants emigrated on one ship from Dungarvan, County Waterford, following the receipt of remittances. Accompanied by glowing accounts of wages and land in America, it was difficult to counter such optimism. However, there were frequent warnings that not all emigrants would quickly share in such wealth, and those that did had to work extremely hard. Be that as it may, it seems that there was no barrier to emigration, and many of those in receipt of remittances, and even those in receipt of remittances who chose to emigrate were elderly people. For those who could not, and I think that the most elderly person I've come across emigrating was a woman called Mary Tansey in County Roscommon, who left Ireland towards the end of the famine, age 94. Inconceivable to think of someone doing that today. For those who could not undertake emigration or did not wish to leave Ireland, the remittance money provided security and allowed the family to remain in the land. For others, it provided the means to leave the dreaded workhouse. Indeed, a large proportion of inmates in the workhouses towards the end of the famine waited patiently for money to be remitted by the guardians so that they could leave at once. In August 1851, for example, in Newcastle West Workhouse in County Limerick, no less than 70 men discharged themselves in 1 week following the arrival of remittances. It was surprising that those who had themselves experienced the horrors of the workhouse, I should say it's unsurprising that those who had experienced the horrors of the workhouse during the famine were quick to send money to family and friends. For example, within a year and a half of her departure to Australia, Mary Brophy, one of the so-called Earl Grey orphans, who was assisted from Mount Mellick Workhouse in County Laois, sent £4 to her mother in remittances. affording her the opportunity to leave the workhouse. Undoubtedly, the assistance provided by Brophy and her fellow emigrants was a welcome solution to Poor Law Guardians to the problem of overcrowding in Irish workhouses at this time. The captain of an American ship which carried remittances by almost every packet that reached Liverpool commented on the workhouse situation when he said, "I had an occasion when in Ireland, when visiting a large union workhouse containing between 2,000 to 3,000 inmates, to inquire if many such sums found their way to the paupers in that establishment. And I was informed that from 6 to 8 persons weekly on average were enabled to leave the workhouse by this means and to pay their passage to America. The remainder of the money after the passage ticket had been bought was used to buy a suit of clothes, an essential prerequisite for prospective emigrants." The arrival of the American money in towns and villages was well publicised, in most cases arriving through the local post office. As remittances were used to pay rent, arrears and shop bills, naturally the arrival of money was carefully watched by landlords, their agents and others. At Fermanagh in County Offaly, for example, the landlord, the Reverend Henry King, was regularly informed by his land steward, Robert Nugent, that tenants who were in receipt of the American money. This information was essentially used to force tenants to pay their rents and arrears on the estate. But it's not possible to ascertain just how many unscrupulous agents like Nugent watched the arrival of the post so carefully. In other instances, landlords were happy to act as facilitators of remittances. In Villierstown, County Water, for example, the landlord held money in trust for the children of former tenants who had emigrated. Likewise, on the Godfrey estate in Kerry, the landlord played a pivotal role in facilitating the delivery of remittances, which were used to procure medical care, amongst other things. Land agents like Joseph Kincaid of the Dublin land agency firm of Stewart and Kincaid delighted with the small sums of money being sent over by persons who had emigrated in former years, as this assisted other family members to go and also to pay rents. Spearheading much of the remittance drive in America was the Irish Emigrant Society, who expanded its activities to found the Emigrant Savings Bank in 1850. According to Marion Casey, in the first year of the Emigrant Savings Bank, the Irish Emigrant Society remitted the modern equivalent of $4.6 million to Ireland. The Society widely publicised these stories of emigrant successes and suggested to readers that a better life lay before them, and of course the rapidity of raising remittances was evidence of this. However, the Society also played another important role in providing assistance and security for those who were cheated of their savings by roguish clerks who imposed, quote, on the ignorance of the unsuspecting poor Irishman. By 1851, such behaviour formed the backdrop to calls to form an Emigrants Protection Society, which for many would protect the huge volume of remittances which passed across the Atlantic Ocean. Clearly, businesses and individuals profited from facilitating the return of remittances, and in particular, banking institutions which were hopeful of improved revenues and advertised, quote, that all letters of credit on New York and Philadelphia would be payable on demand. Likewise, the various shipping agents who carried passengers to America also advertised to carry remittances back to Ireland and profited from this global flow of money to Ireland. For example, in Cork, it was estimated that 3/4 of all remittances to the county were brought by Morris Hamilton and Company, while in Dublin, James Miley, whose offices were located at Eden Quay, controlled much of the transport of money orders to the east of the country. Despite this, there were continued debates about the safety of money coming from America to Ireland. Certainly, great fate was placed in the hands of those who were responsible for carrying this hard-earned money to its destination. Occasionally, the failure of a company meant that emigrants lost out on their money, which was sent home, which in turn might suggest that the figure sent to Ireland was far greater than previously expected. This was certainly true of the demise of Harnden and Company of New York and Liverpool, who by 1850 controlled much of the transatlantic trade. Indeed, throughout Ireland, local agents proudly advertised that Harnden controlled, quote, 3/4 of all the remittances, a great fact and proof of the unexampled confidence and most honourable dealings. However, the demise of Harnden the following year resulted in the loss of Irish emigrant remittances of almost £12,000, although some were eventually recovered. Another man who saw a lucrative trade in emigrant remittances was Abraham Bell, born in 1778 and died in 1856. And he was among a number of Ulster emigrants who had settled in New York in the early years of the 19th century. A Quaker, Bell was said to have been born near Lurgan in County Armagh, and upon emigrating to New York, quickly built up a shipping firm, Abraham Bell and Company, where he emerged as one of the leading merchants in the city. Operating on a number of transatlantic routes, Bell and Company shipped a wide variety of goods to Europe and America and Europe, throughout America and Europe, including linen, glass, and candles. With offices in Boston, New York, and St. Louis, Bell's Irish affairs were handled from 14 Toome Street in Belfast. By the mid-1840s, his business empire stretched far beyond conveying remittances to Ireland, and during this time, business boomed. Return ships brought cargo for auction in the main towns and villages in Ulster, where he acted as an agent for Lloyd's of London. And I don't think there was a single town in Ulster which didn't have a Lloyd's office or a Bell's office at this time. By 1849, Bell was so successful that he looked to recruit agents in all of the major towns in the north of Ireland who would provide prospective emigrants and ready markets for goods on their return. So he was shipping out Irish emigrants in the 1840s. On the return voyage, he was sending back linen, glass, candles, timber, and also probably with the captain, the remittances of money. The surviving records of Bell's Company are scattered across a number of American universities, libraries, and archives. I think they total about 16 different locations. His papers are located, so it makes it very difficult to study it on the whole. But one significant collection is located at the New York Historical Society, and it provides a remarkable insight into the world of famine immigrants and their families, providing details of the recipient, their address, and the amount of remittance. The details of these bills of exchange inform on the nature and process of immigration. For the purposes of this talk tonight, I've taken a sample of over 200 recipients that Bell delivered remittances to between 1851 and 1852, and you can see some of them marked on the map, the locations of some of them marked on the map there. Hundreds more are unidentified in this period by location, or at least by the surviving records of Bell's. In the sample that I show here tonight of 200 returns, the average return was just over £6. So perhaps to allow two people to emigrate. Indeed, contemporary commentators believe that the average sum was about £3, just over the price of passage to America at that time. However, many of the individual remittances that Bell sent of the 200 that I'm dealing with here were much larger. For example, Owen Corcoran from Ballyhaise in County Cavan received £11 from St. Louis in August 1852. James Gann from Enniskillen received £12 the following month, while the widow McCaffrey, also of Enniskillen, received £20. Presumably, such high remittances were intended to fund entire families to emigrate. Those such as James Cox in New Bliss, County Monaghan, and Mary King in Tullivin, County Cavan, were at the other end of the scale, receiving £3 and £2 respectively, which would help towards the cost of passage. While admittedly the sample that I've used is quite small, the geographical spread also provides interesting information on the spread of famine remittances. Of the 200 plus examined in this study, few appear to be located on the western seaboard, stretching from Donegal to Cork, although emigration was particularly high in these counties. However, this did not mean that Bell's network failed to penetrate the western counties, as examples from Kilmacrennan and Ballyshannon and Castlefin in Donegal testify. Perhaps the overall geography of recipients reflected Bell's distribution network in the country, with many northern recipients, including those located at Strabane in County Tyrone, Forkhill, County Armagh, Glenariff in County Antrim, and Newtown Limavady in County Derry. In some instances, the name and county of the recipient is all that was given, and it would be interesting to ascertain, although probably impossible, whether the money was ever received. And I just want to give you a few examples of this. So bear in mind, this money has been sent from America to Ireland, and they were sent, it would be difficult to for example, to identify who Mary Flaherty of Galway was, simply Galway, or likewise Mary McNeil in Roscommon, or how hard would it have been to deliver remittances to Michael Murphy of Cork. Just think about how many Murphys were in Cork. Virtually impossible. Likewise, the transcriptions of names frequently pose a problem, not least in the case of Ciaran Whelan of Maryborough, now modern-day Portlaoise in County Laois, which was transcribed phonetically as Ciaran Whelan. So there was a lot of phonetic translations, and that would have posed difficulties as well when they arrived in Ireland. Using contemporary sources, including Griffith's valuation and other estate records, it is, however, possible to identify many of the individual recipients. I think there's great scope for these records to be used. They've never been used in Ireland to date, to the best of my knowledge, by historians or family historians. For example, William Larkin, the holder of 12 acres of land near Ballylinen in County Laois, survived the famine, and his family were later involved in major land agitation in the 1880s against their landlord, the Marquis of Downshire, or the Marquis of Lansdowne, I should say. Likewise, Joseph Anderson, who was in receipt of £4 from St. Louis in August 1852, was a merchant in the town of Athy in County Kildare, and during the famine tendered to the Athy Board of Guardians. If we just take those two examples, the first one, William Larkin, the 12 acres of land he owned, ironically, my own father-in-law subsequently owned those 12 acres of land at one point. And Joseph Anderson in the town of Athy, the family are still there as publicans on the main street in Athy. So it's possible to bring these remittances right through to the present day and to tell that story. Despite Bell's best efforts in delivering the American money, it was common for disputes to arise over drafts. In 1852, for example, Catherine Cooney of County Limerick claimed that she hadn't received money, $25, which had been sent to her by her son Daniel Cooney in Phillipsville, New York. Writing on his behalf, Curry and Robinson in Marysville, Union County, Ohio, wished to resolve the matter, as Cooney, they claimed, quote, is an uneasy being and will be in torment until the matter is resolved. And in some cases, the money disappeared and it was just impossible to trace. While Bell appears to have been honest and attentive in his dealings, some of his agents may have been questionable in their actions. Some agents were reluctant to part with remittances where the recipient was not intent on emigrating. In many instances, their aim was to prevent the commissioners of emigration from handling it, the money, and it was often they who wrote seeking the money in the first place. So a lot of these agents, of course, were shopkeepers, and bills were owed in shops. So their first port of call was that the bills would be paid, and so they discouraged people from emigrating. The success of Bell and others was all the more remarkable given the imprecise nature of the transaction. In the majority of cases, no townland was given, so a level of investigation must have taken place as money orders were sent throughout the country. As a result of such lack of information often cited on the bills of exchange, there was little that could be done when money did not arrive at its destination. A poor woman in County Cork, for example, sought the advice of the constabulary when a money order from her daughter in Nashville, Tennessee, failed to arrive. Her quest, however, eventually fell on deaf ears. According to a correspondent in the Cork Examiner, money was, quote, apt to go astray, as the badness of the writing or the absence of the name of the post town are the things which most puzzle our post offices, thus leading to confusion. Remember, in the days before air code, the post offices were not entirely blameless in this situation, however, and according to one County Kerry source, extra postage was charged by unscrupulous postmasters for American letters. The bills of exchange that Abraham Bell handled also provide other remarkable details about the recipients. For example, in the bills which were emitted from St. Louis in 1853, the recipients were overwhelmingly female, suggesting that their male counterparts had gone ahead and were now funding the voyage for other family members. There was also a significant amount of widows in receipt of remittance money. The widow Elizabeth Murphy in Ferns received £2. The widow Margaret Wallace in Clones, County Monaghan, £3, and the widow Catherine Walsh of Downey, County Laois, £5, just some of the widows mentioned. The remittances suggest the further backdrop, a breakup of family after the death of the head of the house during the famine years. As already alluded to, priests were often the recipients of emigrant remittances. In Tipperary, the Reverend Dr. Laffin of Fethard and the Reverend Thomas O'Connor of Templemore were amongst them. Doctors too were entrusted with delivering remittances. such as Dr. James Rusk of Baileyborough in County Cavan. And it seems that these men were sought out where the head of the household back in Ireland had died. Famine remittances played an important role in the life, and just if you want to click on there, there are just some advertisements there of Bell's, both his public auctions. On the bottom left there, you see a public auction of bricks, 60,000 English bricks, 50 bars of soap, 50 bars of candles, and 50 tons of lime in barrels. This was in Belfast in May of 1847, during Black 47. So this is the level of goods that's coming into the country from America. On the top left-hand side, you see emigration to Port Adelaide or Port Phillip in Sydney, operated by Abraham Bell from 14 Tombs Street in Belfast. So he was traveling to Australia as well as America. And then there's some other examples there on the right-hand side. You see free passage to Liverpool. I'm not quite sure how free it was, but that's 1844, before the commencement of the famine. You want to go on another one there? Just give you just some example. This is an example of the actual records of Abraham Bell. So you see there, Messrs. A. Bell and Son, St. Louis, July 13, 1852. Gentlemen, since last advices, I have drawn the following bills of exchange. And it goes on to list the individual people. You can see Samuel Harper there of Castlefin and Donegal. And you see Kilmacrennan, you see Forkhill in County Armagh, Patrick McVeigh. It's quite a wide spread there, Tipperary, Mayo, Cork and Limerick. And if you go on there to the next one, the next slide, you'll see some more local examples to here. Mary Fox of Enniskillen, and under her Sarah Boyle of Strabane, County Tyrone, receiving £2. And again, a fine spread from Sligo all the way to Killarney in County Kerry. And on the bottom one there, you'll see Joseph Wallace of Dromore, I think it's Dromore, Omagh, and there's Cavan, Wexford, Westmeath, Cork, and Clones in County Monaghan. There's the widow Wallace that I mentioned there of Clones, County Monaghan. Famine remittances played an important role in life in Ireland during the famine years and in the decades after. Thousands of people depended on the arrival of the American money, either to fund emigration or simply for survival. As one Kerry man wrote, a remittance was a relief most timely. Abraham Bell was just one of a number of people who facilitated the transfer of remittances to Ireland during the 1840s and 50s. While remittances were only part of the process, they do provide a remarkable insight into how emigration functioned during the Irish famine. Undoubtedly, without the remittances, emigration would never have reached the levels it did, and unfortunately the death rates would have been higher. During 1850 alone, the emigration and shipping firm Reilly paid £25,000 on money orders, varying from £2 to £20 from New Orleans. Likewise, from Australia, and Mrs. Chisholm organised the remittance of thousands of pounds from immigrants. By 1854, it was claimed that a parish in County Wicklow was receiving almost £1,000 per month in remittances. Such was the vast amount of money which was being sent to Ireland. The British government was urged to establish a money order exchange to oversee these exchanges. However, in some areas of the country, it was lamented that the remittance fever was now slowing down. This is by the early 1850s, or at least the rate remitted was. Nevertheless, there was extraordinary acts of kindness and would live long in the memory of those who received them. As the prominent Irish merchant Quaker in New York, Jacob Harvey, and it's likely that Bell knew Jacob Harvey, reminded people, quote, no public meetings were called, no special addresses made to induce the poor Irish to remember their friends at home. Their own native charity, the love of kindred, required no such extraneous efforts to bring forth fruit. Similarly, further praising for the efforts of Irish emigrants in remitting money, the Cork Examiner noted, quote, God only knows the amount of generous sacrifice that went up to make this remittance, the stomachs which were pinched for it, the backs which were neglected. These remarkable acts of giving also extended to neighbours and friends, even where it was unlikely that they would ever be reunited. The Freeman's Journal, for example, praised the generosity of one poor emigrant woman who continued to send remittances to buy clothes for the children of her former friends. The remittance of money from famine emigrants challenges the stereotypical representation of the drunken Irish who fail to assimilate into American society. While the remittances alone were not enough to stem the tide of hunger and eviction, they certainly were a great help. One can only imagine the further devastation had these remittances not arrived in Ireland. The emigrant remittances also explain the unusually large deposits in provincial banks in Ireland during the famine years. And this is one of the things that strikes famine historians most, is when we examine the bank records in provincial towns around the country, staggering amounts of money were actually sitting in banks during the Great Famine. The arrival of this money, particularly the large amount, also suggests that many of those leaving Ireland were not merely famished emigrants, and in many cases left with some degree of prosperity. As Tyler Anbiner has suggested, it is time to move beyond the rags to riches story. To do so, we must follow the journey and experience of the Irish famine immigrant and their families. Abraham Bell's papers provide the opportunity to recover and record the flow of money to towns and villages across Ireland, and in particular to Ulster. The records are also of huge importance for family and local historians and may provide some clue as to famine genealogies. For example, the Bell remittances may provide the information necessary to ascertain the social background of the famine Irish. Were these emigrants amongst the strong farmer class, which the Belfast newspaper reported were leaving the counties in such numbers, bringing with them £20 to £200? Remittances continue to play a part in Irish life long after the famine. Contemporary commentators believe that there was no end to this money, which came from the veritable El Dorado. Indeed, the fact that the Irish Exchequer included emigrant remittances in the national income estimations up to the 1960s was further proof of this. These, quote, missives of unforgiving love and charity, which continued in earnest during the years of the Great Famine, played a crucial role in modern Irish history. Thank you. Yeah.
Take them any questions to me. I mean, feel free here to work away with yourselves. These records, are they records?
They're currently paper records. We all say the hope is that we did. They're spread across 16 different institutions. Some are willing to digitize, others are kind of the backlog, you know. So it's called as hope is
what is this distinction of preference about years? Research. We've never access to.
Yeah. We owe a great lot to the archivists and librarians
Jonathan? Jonathan? Can you hear me? You've muted yourself.
I know I did. I'll come over to the folk on Zoom in a wee second or two. They're just asking a few questions here in the room, okay?
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, folks. Is there anybody wants to ask any questions of Ciaran? I'm going to have to sort of hold the mic here towards him. Okay. If you want to talk, if you unmute yourselves, if you want to ask the question, we should be able to hear you on the TV, and then I'll hold the mic up to Ciaran to give a response. I think Brendan Hewitt, had you a question there?
Well, more a comment than anything else. I think Ciaran's talk has given us a broader view of what the famine was all about. We all knew, of course, it was about hunger and deprivation and everything else, but this is a different aspect of the famine where people were being generous to each other across the ocean, and one shudders to think what the overall death numbers would have been had this charity not been in operation at that time and in such vast quantities. And I'm particularly grateful for Ciaran to. I think this is an important contribution to the whole study of the famine and our understanding of it. It wasn't all bad news, but this was the best of the good news. Thank you, Ciaran.
Thanks, man. Oh, I don't know if there's any other questions. Is there
any other questions for Ciaran? Just hold on. From Breeze, just Breeze, thanking everybody who can access the immigrant savings. Where can you access the immigrant savings records?
Yeah, presently the only place to access them, those records, is in New York. I had begun to discuss the possibility of digitizing them, but COVID intervened. But hopefully we can get them digitized and made available online in the not too distant future.
Any other questions, folks? If you can unmute your own mics there, if you want to ask a question. We can hear you on the TV.
Hi, Ciaran. Winston here. Jonathan, can you hear me okay? Okay, can you hear us right? Yeah.
Yeah, Winston, yeah, work away.
Okay. Jonathan can maybe show you there the research we did on population decline over the famine era within our 60 townlands. And we did notice at the time that the biggest population fall was actually in the more prosperous townlands, in the lowlands, rather than the higher ones, which we thought was surprising. But the remittance then probably is a big reason for why that occurred. So he probably has the figure somewhere handy around there, but it definitely bore out the lower and probably more Presbyterian areas. The population decline by immigration was certainly much higher from the census figures. So
that's interesting. You would have imagined that the population decline would have been from the less prosperous areas or less prosperous land, but
yeah,
I would assume that immigration and remittances played a factor in that. And
yeah,
in some townlands, it only took one person going. It didn't take several. One person alone could. This idea of chain migration, and once they knew that they had somewhere safe to go to,
yeah,
and it's very similar to today. Like and certainly I would see that you see different nationalities arriving in my locality, now long before the present crisis. But you might only have one person of that nationality, and then after a few months you have a second family and a third family and a fourth family. So they, when we see the Western Union savings offices and things like that, it's very similar to what the Irish would have done back in the 1840s, 1850s.
Any other questions there, folks, online? Is it
Yes,
Michael? You were
good
trying to
morning.
get a question. Go on ahead, Michael. Sorry.
If I could, I'm obviously from Australia. Is there any record basis that we could check the number of remittances sent to Australia from Ireland at all?
Yes, there is. I'm not an expert or familiar with Australian records. Now, I have to admit, most of the records I would use are Canadian or American, but there are records that Mrs. Chisholm that I mentioned. There are definitely records in Sydney of the numbers, the amounts that were collected, and where the remittances were going. So they would be worth checking out.
Oh, that'd be good. No, thank you very much, and thanks very much for your talk. You gave me a little bit insight of my Irish ancestry. Thank you.
That's great, Michael. Thanks for joining us. Anybody else? Any more questions at all online? Yeah. I'm sitting looking at all these names and curious where everybody is. Michael, I take it you're joining us live from Australia? Nice.
Yes, I am.
Wow, Mike,
yes,
whereabouts, Michael?
I live in the country near Canberra, and thankfully the time's getting a little bit better. It's not 5 o'clock in the morning. I joined these. It's 7 o'clock, so it's quite good.
Yeah, I'm hoping it's a lot warmer there, Michael, than it is here.
It has.
Yeah,
it's
sorry,
only just
sorry,
started
Mike.
warming up.
Sorry, Michael.
It's only
What
just
time
started
is it?
warming up. Sorry,
So I was just asking what
It's
time
about-
it was with you.
it's about 8 o'clock here. And last week it was snowing in some parts of the country, so our weather's been turned on its head again. So, and we put our tomatoes out a bit too early, and now we've got to redo them again. So, and that's life of nature.
Yeah. Yeah, we're all getting adjusted to this new environment and this new world. We've had the warmest November on record. I think in London it was 23 degrees at one stage in November, which is ridiculous. But listen, thanks, Michael, for joining us. It's really great to have you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
No problem. Any other questions, folks? Just want to let Ciaran has quite a drive back down the road again, so I don't want to hold him too long. Okay. Okay, folks. Listen, thanks for joining us this evening. All right.